I always believed that love was unshakable, that once you found the person meant for you, the one who understood you in ways no one else could, everything else would simply fall into place. For 11 years, Ethan and I had been intertwined in a love story that felt untouchable, forged through the trials of youth, ambition, and the quiet, unspoken promises that bound us together. 7 years of courtship, 4 years of marriage. We had survived long-distance struggles, late nights filled with whispered dreams, and the crushing weight of expectations. He had always been my partner in crime, my anchor in the chaos. But now, staring out the window into the dark abyss of the early morning, I realized I had been holding on to an illusion. The weight of my suspicions pressed heavily against my chest, a suffocating pressure that I couldn't ignore. The house was eerily silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. I could hear Ethan's slow, steady breathing from the bedroom, his presence in our bed feeling more like an echo of the past than a reality of the present. A knot of unease twisted in my stomach as I recalled the way he had laughed just hours ago, so effortlessly, so carelessly, his phone glowing in the dim light of our dinner table. I had asked him then, my voice deceptively light, "Who keeps making you smile like that?" His reaction had been swift but subtle, the tightening of his jaw, the half-second hesitation before responding. Work, just the usual nonsense from the project team. A plausible excuse, a simple, harmless explanation. And yet, the fish I had once found comfort in eating, one of his small, loving gestures placing the tenderest part in my bowl, felt like ash in my mouth. My hands had felt cold then, the chill creeping into my bones, but I forced myself to smile, to nod, to pretend that I didn't feel the ground shifting beneath me. That night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, the ghost of his laughter still ringing in my ears. His arm was draped over my waist, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The warmth of his body felt like a lie, his embrace suffocating instead of comforting. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears as a single thought took root in my mind. I have to know the truth, with the precision of someone stepping into dangerous territory. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up his phone, the familiar weight of it foreign in my grip. We had always trusted each other, passwords never hidden, privacy never a concern. Yet, as my fingers traced over the screen, a deep unease settled over me. The phone unlocked instantly as it always had, welcoming me into the world of a man I suddenly realized I might not know at all. I scrolled and scrolled. There was nothing, no messages, no incriminating words, no confessions of love or stolen moments in the night. It should have reassured me. It should have made me laugh at my own paranoia. But instead, it sent a wave of ice through my veins, because the absence of messages between him and her, Natalie, was too perfect, too clean. And that was the moment I knew, not from any grand revelation, not from some dramatic confrontation, but from the deafening silence of his phone, from the gaps in his digital world that spoke louder than words ever could. He had deleted them, erased them as if that could erase the truth. I placed the phone back in its place, my pulse roaring in my ears. The man sleeping beside me was no longer the man I once knew, and the marriage I had built my world around had already begun to crack beneath the weight of his deception. The first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I sat by the window, my arms wrapped tightly around myself, my heart hammering in my chest. The cold morning air bit at my skin, but it wasn't enough to numb the storm raging inside me. And in that quiet, breathless moment, I made a decision. This wouldn't end with me as the broken one. I wouldn't cry myself to sleep in the ruins of my marriage while Ethan and Natalie indulged in their stolen moments of passion. No, They wouldn't get away with this. As the first rays of the sun touched the world outside, I finally let out a slow, steady breath. I had been a loyal wife, a devoted partner. But now I would become something else entirely. The days after my quiet revelation were filled with a strange sense of clarity. The weight of suspicion had been lifted, replaced by something far more sinister, certainty. It wasn't just paranoia or a hunch anymore. Ethan had betrayed me. And now, as I walked through the motions of my life, I felt the world shift beneath my feet. I was no longer the naive, trusting wife who believed in our shared forever. I was a woman scorned, and my mind was already working, calculating, planning. I didn't confront him immediately. What would be the point? Confrontation was messy, emotional, and worst of all, temporary. I wanted something permanent. I wanted him to feel the ground collapse beneath him the way he had unknowingly done to me. But first, I had to watch. It started small, a casual glance at his phone screen when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his grip tightened around it, the flicker of tension in his expression when a message came through, the forced nonchalance in his voice whenever I asked about work. He thought he was careful, but I knew him too well. I began monitoring his routine, noting every inconsistency, every deviation. The late-night meetings that always left him refreshed rather than exhausted. The business trips that coincidentally aligned with Natalie's social media updates about weekend getaways. It was laughable how predictable he had become, how easy it was to follow the breadcrumbs he thought he had so cleverly hidden. Then, I saw them together. I had tracked him down on a Saturday evening, a day when he had promised he was stuck in back-to-back investor calls. Instead, I found him in a dimly lit restaurant, leaning toward her, his hand resting over hers, his eyes holding the same warmth he once reserved only for me. The sight didn't break me. It solidified me. The next morning, I placed his coffee in front of him, watching as he took a sip, oblivious to the silent war I had already declared. "You work too hard," I murmured, brushing my fingers along his wrist, feeling his pulse beneath my touch. He smiled at me, a lie wrapped in familiarity. "I have to," he said, oblivious to the layers of meaning hidden behind my words. Yes, he had to, because I was about to make his life a living nightmare. The first move was subtle. I tightened my grip on the finances, shifting assets, transferring funds, securing what was legally mine under the guise of household budgeting. He didn't even notice. He never bothered with the money. I had always handled it. It was almost too easy. The second move, I planted seeds of doubt in his world. A few well-timed comments to his closest friends about his exhaustion, his distractions, the stress that had been weighing on him lately. Concerned whispers began to spread, business partners casting lingering glances, hesitant about his leadership. And then, the first real crack, a scheduled dinner party at our home, one where I had accidentally invited people who mattered, his mentor, his investors, his colleagues, a night designed to put him under a microscope. I played my role perfectly, the loving wife, the elegant hostess. But when Natalie's name was casually mentioned in conversation, the room tensed, eyes darting toward him with curiosity, judgment. Ethan stiffened. I saw it, the flicker of panic in his eyes, the way his grip tightened around his glass, the forced smile that cracked ever so slightly. He knew. He knew that I knew. The game had begun, and I had no intention of losing. Ethan thought he was clever. He thought his carefully constructed web of deceit would never catch up to him. He was wrong. I had been pulling at the threads of his life, one by one, watching as his world slowly started to unravel. And now, it was time to tighten the noose. The night after our dinner party, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me. He thought he had survived the evening, but I had seen it, the flicker of fear in his eyes when Natalie's name was mentioned, the way his hand trembled slightly when he set down his glass. He knew he was losing control, and soon he would have no control left. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had changed. I kissed him on the cheek before he left for work, made his coffee just the way he liked it, smiled at him like the devoted wife he thought I still was. Let him think he still had me fooled. But behind the scenes, I was orchestrating his destruction. I had already begun liquidating our shared assets, funneling money into accounts he had no access to. By the time he realized, it would be too late. His once flourishing company, the empire he had spent years building, was teetering on the edge of collapse. His investors were losing confidence, whispers of financial instability spreading like wildfire. It only took a few subtle nudges in the right places, concerned business partners, well-placed rumors, to make his foundation crack. Then came Natalie. She had been living in her bubble of stolen affection, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. I made sure she felt the consequences of her choices. It started with an anonymous tip to her university, proof of her affair with a married man, photos, receipts, timestamps of her rendezvous with Ethan. The institution prided itself on its ethical code, and she had shattered it. The disciplinary board wasted no time. The next day, Natalie found herself expelled, her future crumbling beneath her feet. I knew the moment she called Ethan. His face went pale as he stared at his phone, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. She was his perfect little escape, his fresh start, and now she was a liability. He rushed out of the house that night, claiming an urgent meeting. But I knew where he was going. To her. I followed. From across the street, I watched them argue outside her tiny apartment. Natalie was crying, gesturing wildly, shoving her phone in his face. She was desperate. She had lost everything, and she wanted Ethan to fix it. But Ethan? He was panicked, looking over his shoulder, running his hands through his hair. He was unraveling. The man who once held himself with such effortless confidence now looked small, pathetic. Natalie grabbed his arm, but he yanked away, his voice sharp, angry. He wasn't going to save her. He was saving himself. I turned away, satisfied. Let them destroy each other. Back home, I set the final piece in place. The company's board had been growing restless, and with my carefully timed leaks of financial mismanagement, they had begun looking for someone to blame. It was only a matter of time before they turned on Ethan, and they did. The very next day, Ethan walked into his office, expecting another ordinary morning, and walked out hours later with a box in his hands, terminated. His name erased from the company he built. I watched it all unfold through the security feeds, sipping my wine, feeling the weight of victory settle in my chest. I had won, but Ethan's suffering was just beginning. Ethan was drowning, and I made sure he had no life raft to hold on to. The moment the company turned against him, the walls began caving in. He had always walked with an air of invincibility, believing he could charm, manipulate, or power his way through any problem. But now, he had no power left. His accounts were frozen, his assets tied up in legal battles, and the investors who once hailed him as a visionary now called him a liability. I watched as he spiraled, refusing to acknowledge his fall at first. He still had Natalie, right? She had thrown away everything for him, her reputation, her education, her future. But in the end, she was just as self-serving as he was. The moment she realized Ethan could no longer provide her with the life she wanted, she turned on him. It started with her messages flooding his phone, demands disguised as desperate pleas. "You promised me, Ethan. You said you would take care of me." Then came the accusations. "You let this happen. You should have protected me." And finally, the threats. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. I knew Natalie would crumble. She wasn't built to withstand adversity, and when she realized there was no way forward, she did the only thing she knew. She lashed out. The news spread like wildfire. An anonymous source leaked proof of Ethan's affair, company funds used for personal expenses, illicit transactions buried beneath the surface. The story was everywhere, from tabloids to financial columns. His name was dragged through the mud, his reputation irreparably stained. And then, the final blow. A knock at the door came late one evening. Ethan, disheveled, his once pristine suit crumpled, his eyes hollowed from exhaustion, stood in the dim light of the hallway. He didn't try to charm me this time. There were no smooth words, no empty smiles, just silence. I let him inside, watching as he sat on the couch, the same couch where he had once lied to my face, promising me love and loyalty while betraying me with another woman. He exhaled shakily, rubbing his face, the weight of his ruin pressing against his skin. I lost everything, Eve. His voice was hoarse, raw, with the kind of pain he had never known before. Good? I remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. You were right about everything, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Now he saw. Now, when it was too late. I should have never. His voice trailed off, lost in the what-ifs, the possibilities that could never be. He looked up at me then, his eyes pleading. Pathetic. I don't want a divorce, I laughed, a real, bitter laugh that echoed through the quiet room. After everything, he thought he could come back, that he could undo the damage, rewrite history. You don't get to choose that anymore, Ethan. His jaw clenched, desperation flickering in his gaze. He was unraveling. I can fix this, he insisted. We can fix this. There is no we anymore, I said coldly. You threw that away the moment you chose her. He sat there frozen as the reality of it all crashed down on him. His hands trembled as he gripped his knees, his head bowing as if he could no longer bear the weight of himself. I don't have anywhere to go, he admitted, voice breaking. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. And whose fault is that? Tears welled in his eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no nostalgia, just satisfaction. Goodbye, Ethan, I whispered. And then I walked away. The weight of my revenge should have satisfied me. I had taken everything from Ethan, his company, his wealth, his reputation, and even his dignity. He was left with nothing but the ruins of his choices. Yet, as I stood by the window that overlooked the city skyline, watching the rain patter softly against the glass, a strange emptiness lingered in my chest. What now? It had been months since I last saw Ethan, since the night I shut the door on him and ended everything we once were. The divorce was finalized swiftly. He didn't fight it, perhaps because he knew there was nothing left to fight for. He moved into a cheap, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the lavish penthouse we once shared. He had lost his investors, his credibility, and with it, any chance of rebuilding his empire. Natalie was gone too. The girl who once played the part of his adoring mistress had abandoned him when the money dried up. It didn't take long. When she realized there were no more extravagant gifts, no more secret rendezvous at luxury resorts, she left without a word. She was never there for him. She was there for the illusion of power he once had. Now, Ethan had no one. Perhaps that's why I felt this strange sense of unease when I received a call from an unknown number late one evening. I almost ignored it, but something, instinct, fate, curiosity, made me answer. Eve. I recognized his voice instantly. It was weaker than I remembered, laced with exhaustion and something else. Finality. What do you want, Ethan? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. There was a long pause before he finally spoke again. I wanted to see you one last time." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist in unease. One last time. "Why?" I demanded. He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he would hang up, but then he sighed, a sound so heavy it carried through the phone like a weight pressing against my chest. "Because I need you to know, I never stopped loving you, Eve. Even when I was selfish, even when I ruined everything, you were the only thing that ever mattered." My breath caught in my throat, anger and something far more dangerous, pity, coiling inside me. "Don't do this, Ethan," I said, suddenly feeling the urgency in my own voice. "It's too late," he murmured. And then the line went dead. Panic surged through me. I shouldn't have cared. I shouldn't have felt anything at all. But something about the way he sounded, the way he spoke as if he was saying goodbye, sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. I grabbed my keys and rushed out, driving through the pouring rain, my heart pounding against my ribs. I told myself I was only going to confirm what I already knew, that he was nothing to me now, that whatever he did was no longer my concern. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. By the time I arrived at his apartment, the door was unlocked. The small room was in shambles. Empty beer bottles, unopened envelopes, and a shattered picture frame lay scattered across the floor. My eyes landed on the single photo that had been inside the frame. Our wedding photo. My pulse raced as I stepped inside, my breath catching when I saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, a bottle of pills in his trembling hands. "Ethan!" He turned slowly, his eyes dull, lifeless. A sad smile played on his lips. "You came." "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking as I marched toward him and snatched the bottle from his grip. "It doesn't matter anymore, Eve," he whispered. "I have nothing left." Anger flared inside me. "So, what? This is how you end it? You think this will make me regret leaving you?" He flinched, his fingers tightening into fists. "No, I don't expect anything from you anymore. I just wanted you to know I was wrong about everything." I stared at him, at the broken man who once thought himself untouchable. There was no satisfaction in seeing him like this, only the bitter sting of what could have been. I should have walked away. I should have left him to his choices, but instead, I sat beside him, my voice softer than I intended. "Ethan, you don't get to escape this. You have to live with what you did. You have to own it. And you have to fight." For the first time, tears slipped down his face, but he nodded. That night, I left knowing this was truly the end. But for the first time, I wasn't leaving in hatred. I was leaving free. The past had left its scars. And though I had walked away from Ethan that night, the weight of our history lingered like a ghost in the corners of my mind. The world moved on, as it always did, indifferent to the wreckage of our past. I had built my empire from the ruins of our marriage, forged success from the ashes of betrayal. Yet no matter how many victories I claimed, there was a part of me that remained tethered to the memory of what we once were. I hadn't seen Ethan since that night in his apartment. I didn't know if he had truly heeded my words or if he had fallen back into his cycle of self-destruction, and I told myself I didn't care. But fate had other plans. It was an autumn evening when our paths crossed again, unexpected, uninvited, and undeniably cruel. I had just left a high-profile gala, my heels clicking against the pavement as I made my way toward my car. The air was crisp, the city alive with the hum of distant traffic and the occasional laughter of strangers passing by. And then, in the dim glow of the streetlight, I saw him. Ethan. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. He looked different, thinner, older, haunted. His once pristine suit now hung loosely around his frame, the sharp arrogance he once carried replaced with something far more fragile. He was standing across the street, half hidden in the shadows, his eyes fixed on me. There was no malice in his gaze, no bitterness, just a quiet longing that unsettled me far more than anger ever could. I should have walked away. I should have ignored him and disappeared into the night. But something in his posture, the way he stood as if debating whether or not to approach, made my feet hesitate. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward. Ethan. His name felt foreign on my lips, a relic of another life. He exhaled sharply, as if he hadn't expected me to acknowledge him. Eve, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. We stood there, separated by the street, by time, by the choices that had led us to this moment. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice even, detached. He let out a hollow chuckle, shaking his head. "Would you believe me if I said I was just passing by?" I didn't, but I didn't press him either. "You look..." Awful was the word that almost slipped out, but I caught myself. Different. "Life does that to you," he replied, his lips curving into something that resembled a smile, but his eyes remained lifeless. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything left unsaid. Then, finally, he sighed. "I'm leaving the city, Eve." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't sure why. I should have felt relief, closure even. But instead, there was an unfamiliar tightness in my chest. Where? Somewhere far away. A fresh start. His gaze flickered with something unreadable. There's nothing left for me here. And just like that, I realized this was truly the end. No more shadows lurking in the background. No more unexpected encounters. Ethan was finally letting go. "Good," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He nodded, taking a hesitant step backward, as if waiting for me to say something more. But I had nothing left to give him. "Take care of yourself, Eve," he murmured. "You too, Ethan?" With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a long time, watching until he was nothing more than a silhouette against the city lights. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. Ethan was gone. At least that was what I told myself. The night of our final encounter replayed in my mind over and over again. His hollow smile, the weary slump of his shoulders, the emptiness in his voice. I had expected to feel relief, triumph even, but instead, there was only a strange quiet inside me, as if something had settled after years of turmoil. Yet deep down, I knew that some endings don't come neatly tied in a bow. And I was right. A few months passed, and life continued on its relentless course. My business flourished. My name carried weight in circles that once dismissed me. I was no longer the woman overshadowed by her husband's success. I was the woman who thrived despite his betrayal. But then, the letters started arriving. The first one was simple. "Do you ever wonder if you made the right choice?" It was unsigned, delivered to my office without a return address. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe a disgruntled former acquaintance stirring trouble. I tossed it into my drawer and forgot about it, but the second one came a week later. "There are some things you can never undo, some wounds that never heal." My stomach twisted when I read it. This wasn't just random, it was deliberate, personal. I locked the letter away and told myself I was overthinking it. Then came the third. "You think it's over. It's not." The handwriting was the same, the message chilling in its simplicity. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. I scanned the letter over and over, searching for hidden meaning, for something that would explain why this was happening now. But all I could think of was Ethan. I hadn't heard anything about him since that night. He had faded from the world like a whisper, leaving behind nothing but the ruins of his choices. Had he found peace in some distant place? Or was he still drowning in the wreckage I left behind? I needed to know. I reached out to a few contacts, business acquaintances, who might have heard whispers of his whereabouts. The responses were vague, some dismissing him as a lost cause, others claiming he had vanished entirely. It wasn't until a week later that I got my answer. Ethan was dead. The words hit like a punch to the gut. He had died 2 months ago, alone, bankrupt, and forgotten. The official cause was illness, but rumors swirled of something darker. Some said he had wasted away from neglect, too broken to fight for his own life. Others hinted at the possibility that he had simply given up. I should have felt nothing. I had made my choice. I had walked away. But as I sat in my office staring at the last letter, unease settled into my bones. You think it's over. It's not. If Ethan was gone, then who had sent it? A sharp knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. My assistant poked her head in, her expression hesitant. Miss Laurent, there's someone here to see you. I frowned. Who? She wouldn't give her name, but she said it's important. She says it's about Ethan. My blood ran cold. Send her in, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. The door opened and a woman stepped inside. She was young, perhaps no older than 25, with sharp eyes that held a quiet intensity. Her hands clenched a small envelope, her knuckles white from the pressure. You don't know me, she said, her voice calm yet firm. But I know you, and I know what you did to him. I kept my expression unreadable, but my heart was pounding. Who are you? I asked. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. His sister. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't over. Life has a way of coming full circle. When betrayal rips through your world, you can either crumble beneath it or rise from the ashes stronger than before. I chose the latter, but in the process, I learned a hard truth. Revenge doesn't erase pain. It only shifts its weight. Did Ethan deserve what he got? Perhaps. But standing there, facing his sister's piercing gaze, I realized that the past has a way of catching up with us, no matter how well we try to bury it. Choices have consequences. Love, once broken, rarely mends. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply moving on and never looking back. What do you think? Was justice served, or did I go too far? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? If you enjoyed this story and want to see how it unfolds, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel, Men's Cheating Story. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next part, because trust me, this story is far from over. See you in the next episode.